High school classmates, rich, popular Richard Haywood and introverted genius Justin Pendleton maintain a secret friendship while appearing to dislike each other in public. One night, the boys meet at a local abandoned house and discuss various deranged topics, including how to commit the perfect crime, over some alcohol. Richard calls the shots in their friendship, but admits that he needs Justin's smarts to understand how the forensic world works and successfully evade the criminal justice system. As the night progresses, Richard declares that he's tired of waiting for the perfect time to commit the murder they have always planned, and pushes Justin to finally put the plans to work. The next morning, Detective Casey Mayweather is called to a crime scene in which the body of a murdered woman is found dumped by a small river, and meets with her new partner, Detective Sam Kennedy, to discuss the case. Detective Casey guides the new detective as he takes essential evidence and draws the conclusion that the woman has died of strangulation. Meanwhile, in Jefferson High School, Justin's crush, Lisa, asks Justin to tutor her for her upcoming physics exam and invites him to her house. Elsewhere, Detective Casey is disturbed to receive a court notice of hearing for a man named Carl Hudson, but brushes it aside to continue working on the case. On the other side of town, Justin goes to Lisa's house to tutor her, and the two get to know each other better, while Richard goes to see his marijuana dealer, Ray Feathers, who also happens to work in the high school as a janitor. The next evening, Detective Casey emotionally goes through Carl Hudson's criminal file and decides to politely decline the court's request for attendance. In the morning, the victim is identified as a local woman named Olivia Lake, and the detective goes to her house to find it in disarray, showing clear signs of struggle. While the detectives continue their walk through Olivia's house, Captain Rod arrives with the new assistant DA, who also appears to be Detective Casey's ex, Al Swanson, and requests for an update on the case. Detective Sam shares everything they know about the case, while Detective Casey angrily walks away. Later that night, Detective Casey and Detective Sam hang out to discuss the case and get intimate. The next evening, the boys start burning up evidence, while the detectives try to analyze everything that was discovered at the crime scene and come up with a profile of the murderer.
They should be eating out of our hands right about now.
After receiving the model of the assailant's shoes from the shoe print, Detective Sam and Detective Casey go to the high school the next morning to talk to Richard about the Viggy boots he bought a few months prior. Richard cockily and calmly talks to the detectives, establishing a tight alibi, and informs them that he has reported to the principal that his Viggy boots have been stolen 3 weeks ago. Detectives have no option but to drop the inquiry. However, Detective Casey senses that something is off. At the police station, Detective Casey asks the captain to give her a warrant so that she can search for the boots in Richard's house, but the captain rebukes her, firmly citing that he doesn't want to anger Richard's wealthy father, who is a big campaign contributor. Later, Detective Sam goes to Detective Casey's house to apologize for not supporting her request for a warrant, and they get into a fight. Meanwhile, Justin takes Lisa to his greenhouse, and they kiss, while Richard jealously watches from afar. Detective Casey gets fed up after getting multiple calls from Carl Hudson, asking her to appear in court on his behalf, and starts screening her calls. Detective Casey gets to work listing down all the local restaurants known to prepare caviar, and goes around asking if Richard had visited any of them within the last week. Detective Casey rushes to Jefferson High School, tracks down Justin, and starts to ask him a few questions about his choice of restaurants and friendship with Richard. Justin denies ever being close friends with Richard and only admits that he tutored the popular boy once for an exam. This conversation is interrupted by a call from the captain, informing Detective Casey that Detective Sam has figured out that Ray committed the murder. Detective Casey rushes to Ray's house to be updated on the case and finds it swarmed with police officers, collecting several potential pieces of evidence. After hearing the evidence, Detective Casey questions if the murder could be committed by someone of such average intelligence and shares her skepticism with the now lead detective, Detective Sam. Detective Casey shrugs off her partner's suggestion and goes around the back of the house to investigate further. Meanwhile, at the back of the house, Detective Casey is attacked by Ray's pet baboon. One afternoon, Richard offers Lisa a ride and seduces her. Then, Richard waits for Justin at his house, and, after scaring him a little, he gives him a tape of him and Lisa getting intimate. Justin is enraged by Richard's action and dismantles the photograph they made by fusing their faces. Richard then calls Justin and emphatically tells him that Lisa doesn't deserve him and that he is the only one who cares about him. He then adds that he slept with Lisa to show him what she is really like and skips to a different topic to inform him that the police are on to Ray like they planned and remind him that they only have one more step to finish their plan. A couple of nights later, Richard dresses up in heavy-duty gear and visits Ray. Detective Casey is taken to the hospital and Detective Sam waits by her side. After making sure she's okay, Detective Sam informs her that all the evidence has been confirmed to be linked to Ray, but that the suspect has taken his own life. Detective Casey becomes even more suspicious upon hearing of Ray's death, and after fighting with Detective Sam, runs out of the hospital to work on the case further and confirm her hunch that the boys are responsible for the gruesome crime. She then starts following the boys around and manages to steal Jason's trash from his house one night. She rushes the trash to the lab and asks for a DNA match with the vomit particles from the crime scene. However, Captain Rod hears of the order and gives Detective Casey a talking to, detailing he can no longer trust her judgment and stops the order from going through. Detective Casey is undeterred by this, continues surveilling the boys, and sees them together on multiple occasions, even though they claim to not be friends. One night, Richard walks up on Detective Casey as she sits in her car for surveillance. She tries to hide her nerves and attempts to feather Richard by asking him about his friendship with Ray. Richard waves off the detective's accusatory questions, and, as he tries to come on to her, she accidentally hits him with her car door. Detective Casey then rushes to Detective Sam's house to show Justin and Richard's hidden friendship through the pictures she took of them. Detective Sam informs her that Captain Rod is furious at her about her altercation with Richard, which was reported by the boy's wealthy father, and advises her to stay out of the case. Detective Casey begs her partner to give her the benefit of the doubt and details all that she has learned from her surveillance. Detective Sam agrees to cooperate and starts hanging around school, hoping to make the boys nervous, which works as Lisa agrees to speak to them about the boys' friendship. Meanwhile, Detective Casey studies the case further and figures out how they did the crime while establishing a tight alibi. Then, the result of the DNA analysis, which Detective Casey personally paid for, comes back, confirming her suspicion and matching the DNA analysis of the vomit with Justin's DNA. The detectives then come together to convince the captain to let them interrogate the boys simultaneously, hoping to play different mind tricks and get them to break. After a couple of hours of interrogation, Richard is told that Justin has given him up as retribution for sleeping with Lisa. Richard starts to shake in fear, and he starts to narrate what happened, hoping his account will be taken, but is rescued by a lawyer sent by his father. A few days later, Detective Sam comes over to Detective Casey's house and informs her that he knows about Carl Hudson. Detective Casey becomes emotional and shares that Carl was her popular high school sweetheart, who later became an abusive husband. She details about when she attempted to leave the relationship, he stabbed her 17 times in the chest and dumped her unconscious body by the side of the road. Detective Casey reveals that the traumatic incident had motivated her to become a cop. Detective Sam is very sympathetic to Detective Casey and encourages her to get help to work out the trauma and face her fears by facing him at his parole hearing. Elsewhere, thinking that Justin has already confessed, Richard calls Al and tries to cut a deal. The detectives get warrants for the boys' house and start searching through their homes. Richard rushes off to the abandoned house while Justin goes to see Lisa and confesses to committing the crime. He then goes to meet Richard at the abandoned house, where Richard waits for him with a loaded gun so that they can take their own lives simultaneously. There, both Richard and Justin point guns at their heads and count down to shoot themselves simultaneously. Justin fires his gun into the air and realizes that Richard has tricked him by holding an empty gun. Getting the information of the boys' whereabouts from Lisa, Detective Casey rushes to the abandoned house and tries to calm them down. Richard loads his gun and runs away, shooting at her, while Justin jumps in front of her and shields her from the shot by injuring himself. Detective Casey then chases Richard around the house and gets into an intense fight on a feeble terrace where the boy harshly chokes her.
Justin! Justin!
Detective Casey hangs onto the terrace by a thread and struggles to pull herself up until Justin comes to rescue her and lifts her to safety. Detective Casey profusely thanks Justin and promises to help him in court for his help. Detective Casey notices that Richard's ring has left a mark on her neck while he strangled her and remembers that Olivia didn't have the same marks, which makes her realize that Justin was the one that killed Olivia. She confronts the boy with her suspicions, and he confesses that he killed Olivia so that he can prove his toughness to Richard. The end. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.